South Asia and Art Forum SF, welcome you all to the 5th edition of the South Asian Literature and Arts Festival 2024, or SALA as it's popularly known. Thank you for coming and being a part of this festival. Before we begin, a big thank you to all our sponsors who have enabled us to bring this quality of festival to our Bay Area community, especially Travelpod Ozuki. Today's panel is Tales by the Bay. The keynote speakers are Moazzam Sheikh, Anup Judge, Anita Felicelli, and Nayomi Munaweera. In conversation with Jaya Padmanabhan, is an editor at the USC Annenberg Center for Health Journalism. She's a veteran journalist with bylines in the New York Times, PBS Next Avenue, the San Francisco Examiner, the Boston Globe, Forbes, Seattle Times, India Currents, Ethnic Media Services, The Hindu, and more. Jaya is the author of Transactions of Belonging, a collection of short stories published in 2014. Jaya is the recipient of the prestigious Laurier Hemingway Prize for Short Fiction. Just a few house rules before we begin our program. Please keep your cell phones on silent and no video recording. There will be a 15 minutes Q&A after the discussion, and books by the author will be available for sale and signing outside in the atrium or the front lawn. And with that, let's welcome our panelists with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. Lovely to see some familiar faces here, and some who've rushed in from Yosemite at 5:30 in the morning. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this panel of heavyweight literary writers, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to just plunge right into it and give a short introduction to all our panelists, and then start the Q&A. I'll start with Nayomi Munaweera. Her debut novel, Island of a Thousand Mirrors, won the Commonwealth Prize for Asia and was a Target Book Club book. Her second novel, What Lies Between Us, won the Sri Lankan National Book Award. She has been named one of 12 women of color writers you need to know by Bustle magazine, and one of the Asian American women writers who are going to change the world by electric literature. The Huffington Post raved Munaweera's prose is visceral and indelible, devastatingly beautiful, reminiscent of the glorious writings of Eunice Ulrich, Amy Tan, and Alice Walker, who also finds ways to tell through fiction. Then we have Moazzam Sheikh, who's the author of 2 novellas, A Footbridge to Hell Called Love and Unsolaced Faces We Need in Our Dreams, which form a part of his San Francisco quartet. He has also written 2 collections of stories, as well as Idle Lover and Other Stories, and Café Lahore, and there's a play on the word, and Other Stories. In 2004, he edited A Letter from India, Contemporary Short Stories from Pakistan, and in 2017, he guest edited a special issue of the Chicago Quarterly Review on South Asian American writers. He translates across Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, and English. He currently works as a librarian at San Francisco Public Library. And thank you for your work there. Anup Judge is the author of 4 novels, The Running Club, which won the 2015 Beverly Hills Book Award, The Awakening of Meena Rawat, an excerpt of which was nominated for the 2019 Pushkar Prize, No Ordinary Thursday, and Mercy and Grace. Her essays and short stories have appeared in Green Hills Literary Lantern, Rigorous Journal, Lumiere Review, and a number of others. Anup calls herself a recovering litigator. She worked in state and federal courts for many years before she replaced legal briefs with fictional tales. She's a fiction writing instructor, teaching courses at Stanford University and through the Writers Grotto in San Francisco. who's the author of the forthcoming surrealist short story collection, How We Know Our Time Travelers, as well as Chimerica, a novel, and the award-winning collection Love Songs for a Lost Continent. She's the editor of Alta Journal's California Book Club, and she served on the board of the National Book Critics Circle Award from 2021 to 2024. With that, my first question is to Anita. So you talked about writing character observations on flips of paper, receipts, and in some interview that I read, and notebooks. So talk about your creative process and how it leads to the full scope of character development.
Sure. So I actually have been, can everyone hear me?
Just one click.
So yeah, I did say that in an interview. I started out actually writing journals when I was 5 because I planned to be a fiction writer from the age of 5. And so one of my main interests was character. I was interested in how people were different from me and how I was getting different stories from people about even historical events. And I started just taking notes. And also I started to notice that I couldn't actually slot anyone into any particular category, and this is what I ended up loving about fiction. That anyway. So that's what I ended up loving about fiction, why I wanted to be a fiction writer.
It works.
I'm cursed. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Well,
No, it's okay.
we need it for the camera. We need it for the camera.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, when I actually became a lawyer later on, as sort of my day job, while I was still trying to find my way as a novelist, I did start to write on this paper because I didn't have time to keep this voluminous journal anymore. So when I was in places where there were lots of different kinds of people and what they were saying, and you could see sort of the flaws and the idiosyncrasies and the contradictions in people, then I started writing things on.
We can hear you
Okay.
with the mic.
Oh, I think he
Oh.
wants it for the camera.
No, we could still hear you with the mic.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I started writing things on receipts, and that's how that got started. But in terms of creative process, when I'm working on a character, all those years sort of built a muscle memory around character and how to create a believable flaw or contradiction in a character, because there's nothing worse to me than sort of propagandistic fiction that didn't sort of take into account the full person. And so that's how I ended up working on that. When I'm actually revising, I will sometimes think about character in terms of theme and other things that I'm trying to do. But when it comes to the original character, that's usually built off of this muscle memory of just writing down things constantly.
Thank you, Anita. And we're going to touch on different aspects of writing. So my next question would be to Anup. It is often said to introduce conflict at the very get-go in a novel, and the messier the conflict, the better. And I'm reminded of Megha Majumdar's Burning, where she depicts, a horrific scene of a train station being, being this subject where a lot of people died. And in your book, Mercy and Grace, and you two placed a defining conflict at the very beginning, and then with the fallback from that incident. What were some of your considerations as you laid the groundwork for this structure?
Thank you, Jaya. And Jaya is referring to my last and latest novel, Mercy and Grace, explores the growing divide between Hindus and Muslims in modern-day India. And this polarization, according to a lot of scholars, both in India and around the world, stems from the December 1992 demolition of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya and the deadly riots that followed. The novel itself begins with 21-year-old Jia, because I write women's fiction and this is a heavy subject, so I always locate, it's always my heavy subjects, like in this case, As you can imagine, it is a horrific tragedy, as Jaya mentioned, but I always like to cloak it in lighter, romantic elements because women's fiction needs that, and my books never end in doom and gloom. They always end on a hopeful note. But it's a dual timeline. There's Jaya Kumari, who's 21 years old, in an orphanage where the Mother Superior has told her she's aged out of the orphanage and she needs to go and get herself a job or whatever. And in desperation, she calls her Uncle Muhammad, whose existence she only discovered 2 years ago. But he's a lowly cab driver in San Francisco, and he's very reassuring and warm. He doesn't know if he can help her. And then the next chapter harkens back to 25 years ago, where a young Muslim man and a young Hindu woman in Ayodhya are getting married, and the bride, their wedding party is attacked by a fundamentalist mob, captures the bridegroom, drags him away. You can see, imagine what goes next. And so you're absolutely right that it does start with that, and the dual timeline goes back and forth, San Francisco, contemporary times, and 25 years ago. But ultimately, Mercy and Grace is a story of gender, familial bonds, second chances, and the consequences of religious hatred, with the narratives and the protagonist stories playing out against the backdrop of big fat Indian weddings. Because Jia gets an offer of an internship by a wedding coordinator in San Francisco. And she falls in love with America. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Anup. So for Moazzam, you've written novellas. So why novellas and not a novel or a short story?
Well, sometimes it's a calling. Sometimes you're, as an author, you're looking for your own rhythm. But as you mentioned earlier, I do have 2 collections of short stories, and I have dabbled with writing a novel as well. But at this point in my life, being a father, working, and other responsibilities, I just felt, I think my mode of expression suited better in terms of novellas.
And my second question is about dialogue. And you use dialogue very effectively in these novellas, and it falls somewhere between the spectrum of show and tell, and can subtly reveal aspects of the character and establish conflict too. So in a footbridge to Hell called Love, a character remarks that you have a way of segueing from the interiority of a character to the outer world. And I think your writing also does a lot of that. You kind of switch between the interior lives and what you see in a particular scene. So my question is, tell us your process for writing dialogue.
Sure. I believe a writer goes through different phases, as he develops. I started out writing very political, realism-based kind of short fiction. But as time moves on, I became more enchanted by the head, the stories inside the head. And in there, you can, as a writer, you can get lost. You can start inserting your own ideas into the world of the character, and you forget the difference between that. Your characters have their own autonomy and agency, and dialogues often create that separation. You allow the character to become responsible for their own words, and it allows you to create a little. That's just my opinion, and other writers might see it differently. But partly, dialogues became important to me because we live in a very linguistically very rich culture. And it's the same when I went to Delhi in 1998. I was so mesmerized with different registers and different flavors of Hindi that existed in New Delhi that I forgot to even visit Taj Mahal. On my last day, somebody said, "Oh, have you been to Taj Mahal?" I said, "No." I was just so mesmerized with walking. And I think the same thing happened in San Francisco. It's full of people, from varied backgrounds. So it's like it allows me to sharpen my ear to see how people speak, different registers and different social classes. And it sort of like gives you a little perspective, what sort of character you have created. Will this character say something like this or not? Will this character jump out of his, is this character sounding like me, or this character has its own independence?
Thank you. For Nayomi, I recently reread actually Island of a Thousand Mirrors, which you have here, right? Yeah. Which is really.
I reviewed it, but.
Beautiful, brilliant, extremely disturbing and evocative book. So it must have been tough to write that novel. There was a lot of tenderness mixed in with the horrors of civil war that raged through Sri Lanka in the 80s and 90s. And I remember reading graphic accounts of this violence, and scenes have sort of stayed on for 30, 40 years, So my question to you is, what tools do you use to separate yourself from living through your storytelling?
I'm gonna trust the dodgy mic. Oh. Okay. Hi everyone. So nice to see everyone out here on the first day of this festival. Wonderful question, Jaya. And this is a really important question for folks that are writing about difficult events. South Asia, as beautiful and evocative and brilliant as it is, has these really complicated, painful histories, right? So when we are trying to evoke, when we're trying to make narrative around them, I think it's really important that we, as people that live in the West, so I left Sri Lanka when I was 3 years old, and I grew up in Nigeria. And then when I was 12, we came to America. So I actually never lived through the Sri Lankan Civil War, but the whole time that conflict was going on, we were going back and forth. My family was there. I had cousins there, and we would go back over here and hear these terrible, terrible stories. I've been just escaped the ambulance. There are all these different moments, and it was so important for me when I first started writing that book to try and get it right? Like to try and do my best to do justice to what these people had gone through. It was a kind of horror that I could imagine but had never actually experienced. And I think it's really important as a writer to try to get as close as you can. So it's a disturbing book. It's also a love story. There's also joy and food. There's a lot of food. So I don't want people to get scared off by the fact that it's about a heavy subject, which is the Civil War. And then the second part of that question is how do I keep myself sort of psychically safe as a writer, right? As you're going into those places. I don't know, writers are like haunted, right? I don't know, you guys right? Yeah, we're not necessarily like the most normal people in the world, We're haunted by these questions, we're haunted by history, we're haunted by maybe literal ghosts and memories and ancestral traumas, and we're holding a lot. When you meet someone that has done this work, please buy our books because we've been working really hard on this stuff. How do I keep myself safe? I have a large community. I talked a lot about our writers. I go for a walk. I'll call my friends and say, listen, I wrote a really difficult scene, and this is the 6th time I've rewritten it, because it doesn't just come out looking like this. This is maybe the 30th draft. I want you to know. It's not automatic. It doesn't just flow. So please take me on a walk, because I need to get out of this headspace. I need to meditate. I need to do a lot of sort of spiritual things to clear it out. And I'm just going to do this probably unconventional thing, which is to do a plug for myself. I have a writing class called the Writing Coven, where I gather folks together so we can go on those writing journeys together, and so that writers don't feel really isolated. So if you want to talk to me about that, I have flyers here. Thank you.
And just to mention that I was part of the Covenant, and it was a fabulous experience. So yeah. With that, I think I want, it'd be great for each one of you to read a section from your books. Yeah, Nayomi, can you start?
So because I have this reputation as someone who writes really horrible things, I chose a fun, kind of sexy part of my book. And a little setup is we're heading towards 1983, which is Black July in Sri Lanka, race riots that will engulf the country. It's really a very dark period of our history. And the characters that I have here are a Sinhala girl and a Tamil boy who are having an illicit love affair within, in this hidden room between their two houses. She learns how easy it is to deceive those who do not accept deception. She learns that her mother is unable to imagine the possibility of her daughter trembling in the arms of the upstairs Tamil boy. Her mother perceives threats only from the men on the street, the male cousins at parties, the usual avenues by which deception may be enacted. Over the months, the couple become ruthless, disappearing often into their jasmine-shrouded den. Held within these blue walls, they can hear the diverse workings of the house, the faraway sounding calls of their families, his brothers and sisters, her mother and Alice. It is like being submerged underwater, lying on the ocean bed, listening to the voices of a different world. He takes away the necklace of her teeth on his shoulder, like a prize won in battle. A bruise blooms on her inner arm and she flaunts it, spinning an elaborate story concerning a cricket ball when asked to explain. The deception is easy to spot if anyone is looking, but no one is, and there is in her this demon that wants love to be acknowledged, wants to claim this slim, handsome boy as her own, despite the punishments that such claiming would entail. It has been 6 months since they first found the room. While upstairs, her mother works hard to manipulate the marriage market in favor of her younger daughter. Robin holds her head in his hands, the thumbs pulling the very corners of her eyes, staring first into one and then into the other. She tries to pull away, and his gaze becomes so intense, so demanding, that she doesn't know what he's asking for. He says in a rush, "Let's get married. I have an aunt who married a single woman. I have an aunt who married a single man. I wish. Then there'll be an uproar for some time and then they'll forget." She stares at him with those enormous, uncomprehending eyes as she realizes what he is asking for, the whole of her life, the weight of her entire life. That is what he wants. Pushing past his reaching hands, such madness he speaks, as if the differences between them could be blown away like dusty cobwebs, as if her mother, broken-hearted Dawn Beach Walker, could survive the idea of one of her daughters married to a Tamil. She runs from him, bursting out of the room, both hands held out to push past heavy jasmine, but not before she has seen the thing that is smashing open in his eyes. He will not speak to her. He ignores everything, her frantic pleas at the gate, the love notes left in their various hiding spaces, her hours of waiting in her small, square room. Icy claws squeeze her heart. When she takes to her bed, her mother hovers, and she mutters, "Cramps, monthly visitor." Heartbreak like an illness. Heavy limbs, aching head, the pain across her chest. Only Alice, the servant woman, seems to know the truth and comes to stroke her head, pull long fingers through her hair, saying, "It's all right, it had to happen, it is the best thing." And she realizes Alice has always known since the beginning that nothing in the house escapes the woman's cat's eyes. She realizes that Alice too perhaps has experienced this sickness, been bereft of love. She buries her head in Alice's lap, inhales a scent of garlic and cumin gathered there, cries her eyes out. When she falls asleep, it is in exhaustion, like losing a wrestling match or drowning. Thank you.
I would die, he said, still holding me in his embrace, to make love to you. As soon as he felt my body tense up, he offered, for the last time, a peg. But I held my tongue. I remained in his embrace, my body relaxed. I remained quiet, hearing, separating his heartbeat from mine. I felt freed by his presence. Anybody who'd served in the army or the police was capable of killing. Heck, any man was capable of that. I'd always around the notion of men, all men being potential murderers. I didn't want him to even suspect I was afraid of him or that the thought of being killed by him had crossed my mind. I remained where I was. When I came back to my senses, I felt his hand stroking my hair. And the back of my neck. Did he lie to me again? Let me think about it. And having said that, I eased myself out of his grip. I walked to the window and parted the curtains to let more light in. Can you answer one question honestly for once? I asked without turning to face him. Somehow, I must have trusted the sunlight more. Yes, of course, he said rather aggressively. I turned, rested my butt on the windowsill. Did you leave me, Sam, because you thought? I paused. Tamar might not be your child. It was my turn to play mind games. His face turned red. How could you say such a thing? He protested. I felt unconvincingly. Because you thought I was cheating on you. He remained quiet, shook his head once, exhaled a few times as if saying, Anila, you are too much. You were convinced that I was cheating on you because I knew you were cheating on me. Isn't that right? I asked. He kept shaking his head. I was relieved, though, he didn't go into the whole thing about me not believing his early story. I made it plain now that I didn't believe the bulk of it. He might have suffered some of the things once he was away, but he didn't leave me because he was pressured by some higher force. He left because he was a coward, because he couldn't see himself settling down, because he suddenly had a child to take care of. I don't know what to say, Anila. No, I never thought Tamar wasn't my child. He said forcefully, his upper body leaning forward. The fear of getting harmed by him crawled back into my skin. I smiled and stood nodding. It's not that I didn't miss you, and at some point I forgave you. I truly let you go. I'm really sorry, sweetheart, he said. I almost choked, but anger bubbled in me. Let me think about it, whether we should sleep with each other. There's another person involved here, if not more. A Freudian slip, the if not more part. And I'll let you see Tamar. She is your daughter after all. He thanked me and offered to make some tea, which I declined. I was immensely relieved when he alluded to the fact that I might have to head back to pick up Tamar from school. I found it hard to disengage myself physically and emotionally from him. It was a good thing, too, that he didn't offer to accompany me to the BART station. It was painful to say goodbye to him. He was my first true love. As soon as I had turned the corner, I felt queasy, a bit dizzy. Something was off. There was something fishy about the whole encounter. It was hard to believe that I just spent a couple of hours with the love of my life. The man who ditched me and his daughter. I should have, in fact, punched him in the face for daring to come back into my life, even for a day. Thank you.
Miss Kumari, Jia spun around to be faced by a bald man with skin so white that Jia could see the little pink pinpricks in his nose and the blue and purple capillaries in his cheeks. He was wearing a black suit and cap with a glowing white shirt underneath. He regarded her seriously as he held up a small white board with her name written on it in black marker. Yes? Welcome to America, the man said in a deep voice, and Jia fell immediately in love with the accent, which slid over the words like ghee melting over parathas. My name is Roger, and I'm going to drive you to your apartment. Did you have a good flight? I slept. That's good, Roger answered in a slightly robotic tone, like perhaps the answer would have been the same if Jia had said, well, we nearly crashed twice. He looked down at an ancient cloth suitcase, which had been among the smallest on the luggage carousel. Waiting for it to come out had been equal parts nerve-wracking and thrilling. That's all your luggage? Jia nodded dumbly. Let me take that for you, Roger offered. Feeling like things were becoming more surreal by the moment, she let him take it. When they came out of the airport, the air felt colder and everything was brighter. They were not the masses of people darting into traffic as they had been in Delhi, squeezing past cars, bulls, lumbering trucks painted with gaudy gods, nor the blare of 100 horns or the shrill whistles of loitering policemen. There was not a single person haggling with a cab driver or eating roasted corn from a cone, crumpling the newspaper print and throwing it on the ground for birds to peck at or stray dogs to lick. There were not idle groups of men smoking beeries and watching passing women. A car waited for them, black, stretched, and sleek. Jia did not know much about cars, but she could appreciate the inside of the rear section, which had a cream-colored leather covering on the seats, with a lacquered reddish wood on the inside of the doors and on the outside of the small cooler that was open in front of her. Help yourself to a drink, Roger called from the front seat. You want the screen up or down? Down please, Jia replied, randomly picking an option as she didn't have the slightest clue what he was talking about. She picked up a can of Coca-Cola from the cooler and opened it with a satisfying hiss, sticking the thing straight in her mouth as it threatened to bubble over and make the upholstery sticky. The ice-cold sweetness flooded through her, a taste that she had enjoyed precisely twice before in her whole life, both times when some wealthy patron or other had treated them to a free lunch at McDonald's in honor of their kid's birthday. And here they were, handing it out for free in the back of a chauffeur right to the apartment that had been provided for her. Jia loved America already, even while fear gripped her that something had to be wrong with this picture. She was to be an employee at an event company, yet she was almost feeling like royalty. Did they think she was someone that she was not? Someone who deserved all this? First time in America, Roger asked with the air of someone picking the question from a selection of possible right conversation openers. First time anywhere, Jia almost replied.
move that line?
Just one question.
So this is from my short story collection, Love Songs for a Lost Continent. This is really embarrassing. I might have been a small boy when I first heard about the lost continent of Chimerica. And when the stories came up in a folklore seminar at UC Berkeley many years later, a strange shiver moved through my heart, a moment of nostalgic recognition. Legend goes that Shiva bequeathed Chimerica to his daughter Kandaya. There, in that deep southern paradise, the millions fished for pearls and wore dresses fashioned from flowers and foliage and animal skins. The Pandian kings formed 3 Tamil Sangams, assemblies of poets and scholars, to foster a love of literature, poetry, and knowledge among their subjects. But as everyone knows, bliss never lasts, and utopias are, by their very nature, doomed. The ocean swelled, whipped into a frenzy by some mysterious force. Tsunamis swallowed the Sangams with unmatched ferocity. Men continued to die of thirst for Chimerica, but the homeland was submerged, lost forever in the salty black waves. My father unspooled tales of the lost continent on warm nights. Rattling and heaving, trains chugged past our Palo Alto bungalow, and the ghostly scent of star jasmine blew into my bedroom window. My mother knew the stories better, and after he started, she would embellish them in her warm, husky voice, and so was her voice, they could wonder, that followed me into my dreams. What I didn't realize back then was that the Chimerica legend was about a longing for what was past and glorious for Tamil people, a longing for origins in a vast land that stretched from Tamil Nadu to Madagascar, origins that might never have existed. When I was 28, I was awarded a Fulbright research grant that would take me back to Chennai. To explain the purpose of the grant, I reminded my father and mother of the stories they told me. Why on earth would we tell you those lowbrow tales of Kumarnatu? My father asked, scratching his gray beard. There's no scientific proof for them. My mother said nothing. She leaned against the back of the scarlet couch and shut her eyes. She felt fatigued and unwell for some time, so I thought nothing of her silence. Maybe you wanted me to feel a kinship? My father swiveled away in his natty gray office chair and gave a short, barking laugh. Looking at you now, how I wish I hadn't. What a thing to say, Chronicle said with disapproval when I recounted the discrepancy between my father's account and mine on one of our dates. With dark amber skin, she was slight and graceful but had muscular thighs like the trunks of 2 palms. The long mass of her hair streamed in a curly, undulating tangle down her back. She pursed her lips and rolled over and away from me. I rose from the hard cot where we finished having sex and pulled a stainless steel jug of water I boiled from the refrigerator. I poured the water into a tumbler and drank it, and sank down next to Komagal again, running a hand along the supple curve of her hip. Yeah, but he just wishes I'd become an engineer or a doctor. He thinks maybe he sent me off on the wrong path by telling me Tamil myths instead of reading me nonfiction. But Tamil is your mother tongue, or it should be. He probably thinks Sanskrit is a better language. Ridiculous. But you agree that Tamil is the most beautiful language in the world, don't you? Komagal stroked my cheek with her warm hand. Unlike me and the second-generation kids I knew in the Bay Area, she pronounced the name of our language correctly and spelled it Tamil, the way purists do. Not Tamil with an L, but with a a sound more like a ra, a sound with no English equivalent. This was one of many tiny things that endeared her to me. I didn't know Sanskrit well enough to say, but I wanted to keep looking at her into the summery midnight of her long-lashed eyes, and I already understood her. She would storm out if she suspected me a traitor to her cause. I nodded. It's an ancient language. I don't understand why you wouldn't, and I don't think I would like your father much. No, he's kind, he's smart, you'll love him. He did have those traits, but I wasn't at all certain she would love him. She'd assessed him correctly.
We had a quick sample of some of the colors, that kind of pop out with all these writers when they write. But one thing I want to mention, this panel finishes at 1, but I have a whole bunch more questions, and there's a lunch hour right after, so I'm going to run a little over if you don't mind. My question, I'll start with you, Actually, I'm going to ask this question. It's really important to develop secondary characters in all your novels. So, talk to me about one secondary character that you created, and actually I want that question to be answered by all of you. One secondary character that you've created that you feel, that the world should know.
Sure, I might cheat a little here. In the very first novel that I wrote about two sisters. One was an artist, and one would go on to become a lawyer and be in kind of the protagonist, but an anti-heroine in the second novel that I wrote.
Mic isn't working.
Yeah, this mic is not working. I know, it's really just not.
Yeah, I think they have weak batteries.
Anyway, so yeah, I think that artist became a very good secondary character in the second book, but that was partly because I had already written her as a primary character in the first book. So I had seen her on the page develop, and I had also seen the sister, who became the main character of the second book, play out her entire adolescence and early 20s in the other book. And so I had an idea already of these characters.
I don't have a story like Anita's, but my third novel, No Ordinary Thursday, which actually has a Hollywood agent, so keep your fingers and toes crossed for me. But I have somebody called Cookie Auntie, and she's an older grandmother type, and she's very connected with the community, and that novel straddles people of my generation who were not born here, and my kids' generation, and the challenges both generations face. One with one foot in India, of my generation, and the other having the judgment of a society they were born into but didn't choose. And so Cookie Auntie becomes the fulcrum. Her real name is Kokila, but given the British hangover knack for having pet names that many of who are from India as me would understand, she's become Cookie Auntie, and she's a fixture. And Maya, who is marrying a very eligible bachelor of Silicon Valley, his father is a multi-millionaire, if not a billionaire. He's 12 years younger than her, and the judgment of the entire Indian society is on her, calls her cougar and all sorts of names. She tells her love story and why she went, in spite of knowing the judgment of the Indian society would fall on her and her mom, who's a single mother. She narrates the love story to Cookie. Cookie also is a very easy fixture that I could park because she's connected with everyone. And then she's losing her mind. So she embarrasses her daughter Anita all the time because repeating a story that she was a topper in Delhi University, and St. Stephen's College asked her to come to their college, which is not true. It is the good old boys network that the father did. So, and that character was based on my mother before she passed away, and I could see that she had dementia and repeated the same stuff over and over again. And to me, that in that book, Cookie Auntie became a very special character, and readers felt that about her too.
Yeah, I guess so. But this is working perfectly. I believe all characters are central, and all secondary characters that we perceive as secondary are basically bifurcation of the main character. And that's just my way of thinking, and of course the main character is an extension of the author's own projection. Having said that, we always shift weight and allocate more importance to certain characters. In our first novella, the protagonist, having gone through different stages, finally settles down with a person from his group of bohemian that he didn't really was close to, but somehow he runs into her in the third section, and she is in recovery. She's done a lot of things. She have relapses, and there's a question about whether he's going to stick it out with her or not. So in the process of creating this character named Barbara, who in the past had a lot of tragedy, and she was a pole dancer in San Francisco. She did phone sex from her home while she's in college. And these characters are modeled. I mean, her character really is a composite of people I've known in my own, younger life when I was living in, in a particular milieu in San Francisco. So I really had a lot of empathy for this character, and I almost saw that as if she kind of becomes the conscience of the whole novella.
My favorite secondary character is called Mala. It's Aunt Mala. She has a gorgeous garden. She's based on my own aunt. And the story I tell about her is, and it's based on a true story, is when my aunt was pregnant with my cousin. It was 1983, it was July, and you know what happened in Sri Lanka during that time. They drove to the hospital for her to have the baby through the riots. And there's a scene in the book. It ends well. I mean, that's a spoiler, but there you go.
I have some rapid fire questions now, which are going to be fun questions. These questions they have not seen, so I'm going to ask some quick questions. So, how long did you take to write that first sentence in your most recent book?
Months and months.
Anyone have a different answer?
My opening sentences,
Yeah.
they just come and stay pretty much. And they are the sort of like, the launching pad. But I may change them grammatically, I didn't go English medium school in Pakistan, so I still have to run it by my wife and other people. But usually the opening sentences stay.
I wish I could say this. When I hear on podcasts authors say that the character just came to me, that's never happened. It took me a year to write my first sentence. It is a quote from Jaya Padmanabhan because this latest novel, which is out on submission, is about an open marriage between a South Asian couple who draw up a manifesto and when the rules are broken. So I begin with a quote from George Bernard Shaw, where he actually discusses matrimony. So let's hope when the novel is bought and published, it remains so.
I have the same answer as Moazzam. I usually thinking about a story or work of fiction for years before I get a chance to actually write it down. So by the time it comes pretty fluidly because I'm thinking about it while I'm doing laundry or doing dishes or whatever. So.
Keep in mind, a message from a fan that you will always remember, someone that has remarked about your book. Is there anything someone has said that kind of stuck in your head?
Yeah, there was a man who I guess I met on Twitter, and he bought my book, and he wrote this really beautiful Goodreads review that was so much smarter than like other people who I would have thought would have picked it up better because they're in America or whatever. But it was just the most beautiful review, and so yeah, it was. He got all of the things about racism and colonialism and all these different aspects, while like I was getting white American housewives saying like, oh, I think. Why didn't she appreciate her husband more? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God. But this man somehow got the book.
That is such a great question. For this book, all those who were here, and I told you it's about the divide between Hindu and Muslims, I had a sensitivity reader. And usually, in publishing companies, the sensitivity readers are separate and they never write to you. But she wrote to me. She said, I'm the product of a Muslim mother and a Hindu father. Yes. And she said, usually the tendency when authors write about something like this is they blame one religion on the other. And she complimented me on keeping it totally neutral, blaming either the British who had taught, and it's in the book how they had sowed the seeds of that kind of division, and or blaming politicians. But never did it cross over to ordinary people. And that was my hope that readers would get. So it was a wonderful, wonderful message back from this. read?
Well, I wish I could remember verbatim what people said, but it's a couple of times old friends who have shared my life in the Mission District in the late 80s and early 90s have sent me a note saying how well I've captured that particular cafe, used bookstore milieu, which is gone.
So this is such a good question. I get a lot of people that are happy to read, and I have an essay in a book called "What My Mother and I Don't Talk About" that gives these very heartfelt messages from folks that are like, "Oh, I thought I was the only one that had this kind of relationship with my mother," and those are they're very sweet, they're very long and lovely. And then I'm thinking also about a specific reader who wrote to me about my second book, What Lies Between Us, which is not here. But that book is about child sexual abuse. And I was hearing from many, many women, because this is a secret, sort of epidemic right in our communities. But the person I remember is this man who wrote to me in his 60s, and he said, I've never disclosed that this happened to me. And it happened with a religious leader. And I will always just remember that man. I don't know who he is, but it's a big deal when your book does something like that for someone. And that will always stay with me.
Yeah, it's always interesting when your book touches someone in a particular way. And I remember one person writing to me after I published my collection, saying that he's formed a reading group where he wants to read with younger writers, read through the stories, and I thought, that's beautiful for me. Last question before I turn it over to the audience is, which author do you compare yourself to, and which author would you like to be compared to?
Such a hard one. I mean, God, how do you answer this? Oh, God. Who would I like? Oh, my God, this is ridiculous.
Not like
compare. Who am I compared to?
Yeah, so when you write, especially for publishing houses, you have to write this page where you compare yourself to certain writers.
I guess everyone is some kind of Jumpa Lahiri for the publishing industry. I'm just remembering Jumpa, Sandeep Roy's the gay Jumpa, so we get compared to her quite a bit. On a very good day, I'm compared to like Michael Andanji, like hats off and these kind of people. I don't know, I just have writers that I love so much. It's always a joy and an honor and a pleasure to be compared to any of them.
I find that question very difficult to answer. As when I recall, in my journey as a writer, I vividly remember mimicking or trying to mimic or being influenced by different writers in different stages. In the beginning, for most South Asian writers, it was Rushdie, then I changed to Amitabh Ghosh, and then I changed to the guy who wrote Upamani Chatterjee. And this is the early phase of, some of you guys probably remember that. There was a time when I was trying to write like Nayyar Masood, Urdu writer who got quite exposure in the wider world. So it's, but recently, as I started writing novellas, there are a few writers that I have been influenced, even though we do write very differently. I'm very drawn to certain French writers. One of the writers who has really showed me that you can do a lot in small novellas is Amélie Nothomb. She writes a lot, very prolific, every year new novella. So I thought maybe she's treated as fluff in France, but I realized, no, she's highly respected. She's very quirky. My novels are more subtle, they're not as quirky. French are different than us. Having said that.
So, as I told you, I write upmarket fiction, which is a genre of literary fiction, but which focuses on the hopeful and the uplifting, although the subjects are heavy, and it's not all doom and gloom. So I'm compared to Balli Kaur Jaiswal, who wrote sex life of Punjabi women and the adventures of Sheikh sisters. But I think I would love to be compared with Chitra Devankar, who was a big influence on me when I started writing.
I usually get compared to Kelly Link and Nayomi, and that is also mostly who I would like to be compared to, but it would also be cool to be compared to Elena Ferrante.
Elena Ferrante.
Okay, with that, questions from Rashid?
Compliments to all of you. You've written such female-centric stories, which we are all craving as older women, especially displaced older women. Would you, I'm a filmmaker, do you see your stories going to film? Do you aspire to that? Or? Yeah?
Actually, I think everyone who's a novelist aspires to that. And the dividends would be much better.
Yeah. Do you write scripts then, or do you just stick to?
I don't write scripts, but I worked on an episode of a TV show called Chimerica. That's Kamal Nanjiani's TV show. The episode about Sri Lanka. It's the Sri Lankan immigrant.
Thank you.
My husband here claims that happy people are not good writers. He always says that one has to draw from one's own stresses and experiences to enrich one's writing. Do you feel that way?
Are you asking me?
No.
Can you repeat your question? I mean, it is about something writers being happy people and not happy people?
That's it. Happy people are not good writers because they don't have. Happy people are not good writers because they have nothing to really draw from. They have to have stresses.
It's very hard to prove either way. So the fact is that writers or artists or artists and average human being leans towards sadness, or life is full of so many tragedies, mishaps, and it is that what gives, I think, the author a jolt. I'm sure there are people who are perfectly very happily married, wonderful life, everything's taken care of, and they can create very good fiction, drama, whatnot. And it's so hard to quantify, But for me personally, I am very drawn to human struggle and human resilience and tragedies and the human will to overcome that.
So you do agree with him?
At the back.
Hey, my name is Jay. In this age of, my name is.
We can hear you.
It doesn't work.
But it's a full voice.
My name is Jay, and in this age of incessant connectivity, where people are glued to their cell phones, what each one of you have done is commendable, truly. And the next question is, in order to be able to reach a broader audience, probably there is a need, there is an opportunity for yet another form of expression. So we have had short stories, we have had novella, we have had novels. There is some other kind of innovation which is knocking the door. If you have any ideas, you can reach out to me. I have some ideas. I have audiobooks, and in my spare time, I read short stories for my children, among other things. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm curious what each of the panelists considers a metric of success for the book.
Metric of success. I mean, that's a really difficult question. I think if you're touching people, if you're touching your readers, if you have a readership that really feels like they've been seen. I mean, we're all South Asians in America. We are pretty invisible. We're pretty, I think, marginalized, even though we have tremendous economic success. Our inner lives, our spiritual lives, our sexual lives are not really out. Sort of, we're pretty underrepresented. For me, if I can represent those things in a way way that people really find touching, that's fantastic. Would I like a seven-figure bonus? Yes, of course. Like, we all would. We would love that. But I don't think any of us got into this for anything outside sort of like deep soul reasons.
I think it is. Books on
Oh, there's one signing up, okay. Just one last question from someone. Okay. Maybe later. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm the husband. My question is different. My question is, do you write for yourself? Like someone writes for himself, and people like it, great. Do you write for yourself, or do you write for your readers? Or is the hybrid? You start with writing for yourself, and then you write and modify for your readers?
First, Ivan Peterson once said, I write because I need to make sense of the world around me. And that's how I begin all my books, whether Muslim Race, The Growing Hindu-Muslim Divide, or No Ordinary Thursday, where a very much younger man is marrying an older woman, and same day that her brother tragically, a drunk driver, kills a girl. So that's what my genesis is to understand why this is happening, what is happening. And I only write about the Indian American diaspora in the context of 21st century America. But I let Anita answer this as well.
No, I'll ask Devi's last question for Anita. Maybe Devi, go ahead. Seila, sorry.
My question was about your process. Do you start with your characters and round out your characters and let them drive the plot, or do you think of a plot and then just kind of think of characters afterwards?
It actually just depends on the specific story. I think originally it was the characters driving the plot, but I've become more and more fascinated with plot, and so sometimes now an idea for a story will come. But typically the character comes along with it. It doesn't, it's not the plot when I try to shoehorn the character into it, it's just that the plot arises with the character.
Okay, with that, thank you all for some phenomenal writers here too. There is all the writers, please stand up. Shobha is a great one. Sheikh is a poet. There are a number of really phenomenal writers, and people in the art field, the drama field, the acting field. Stella is a filmmaker. So thank you all for all the work that you do. And Kapuna.